Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, and welcome to the webinar for the San Francisco Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative. This is Joanne Lee at the Northern California Community Loan Fund. We have a few more minutes before we will start the actual webinar. So thanks for joining early, and we will be back in a few minutes. Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Joanne Lee at the Northern California Community Loan Fund, and welcome to our webinar this morning on the San Francisco Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative. It's our application information session for the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund. It is 11 o'clock, and I appreciate everyone being so prompt. I'm going to give like 2 more minutes to let a couple more people join in, and then we will be back on and start this webinar. So please, thanks for your patience. We'll be back on in 2 minutes. Great. Good morning again, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning for the San Francisco Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative. We're going to do an application information session this morning about the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund. My name is Joanne Lee. I'm the Director of Consulting Services here at NCCLF, and joining me is Karen Sullivan, our Managing Real Estate Consultant. Just a quick housekeeping item. In your sidebar, there is a tab for questions, and during the webinar, feel free to type in any question that you have, and we will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so we'll be reading through those. So with that, again, welcome, and our agenda for this morning is coming. Sorry about that. So our introduction will do an overview of NCCLF and our services. We will be providing an overview of the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative, and then talking more in depth about the investment fund, the acquisition grant opportunity, and a little bit about our technical assistance services. And again, taking questions at the end of the webinar. Our presenters again this morning, this is Joanne Lee, and
this is Karen Sullivan.
And you'll be hearing more from Karen in a couple minutes. So a little bit about the Northern California Community Loan Fund. We are a nonprofit also that focuses on promoting economic justice and alleviating poverty through our suite of services, which includes our consulting services, which is where our technical assistance program sits, as well as the grant making work through the sustainability initiative. We have a lending program that provides loans to nonprofits for affordable housing, working capital, and we also provide new market tax credit investments. We have a policy arm, and we're also a vehicle for socially responsible investments, which is how we form the loan fund. A little bit more about our real estate and financial management consulting services. We work with all sorts of nonprofits of various sizes and within different sectors, helping organizations with their real estate issues that come up, everything from space planning and strategic planning and deciding whether leasing versus buying is appropriate for organizations. We do new market tax credit consulting. We also do financial management consulting, helping organizations understand their business model and their financial position, budgeting, and cash flow management services. So today we're going to talk about the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative. NCCLF is proud to partner with the City of San Francisco on this initiative that was launched in 2015 to help San Francisco nonprofits secure new nonprofit-owned space and create solutions for organizations seeking long-term leases. Many of you might be familiar with the Nonprofit Displacement Mitigation Program that ran from 2014 through 2017. This is kind of the successor program to that. We are funded by the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and this program is implemented in partnership with the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development and the Arts Commission. So to date, the NSI program has awarded $7.2 million, and we've worked with over 90 San Francisco-based nonprofits in this program, both in the financial assistance awards, grant awards, and in technical assistance. To be eligible for any of the NSI programs, you need to be a 501c3 nonprofit or a fiscally sponsored project. Located in San Francisco with a record of serving low-income and historically underserved communities in San Francisco for the past 3 years. So the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative is really comprised of two different programs. The Nonprofit Space Investment Fund, which is a grant program for acquisition, where and we will talk more about that. Karen will go into depth about the opportunity that is open right now to submit a grant application for. But you do need to have a fully executed letter of intent or purchase and sale agreement and be ready to close your acquisition by November 1st, 2019. And the application deadline is on February 22nd at 12 p.m. The Nonprofit Space Stabilization Fund is comprised of two different programs, a financial assistance grant program, really for organizations that are leasing and are executing new leases at the time of application. And this program, the funding is closed for this year. We just made grant awards a couple months ago, and so you can look for that in the next budget year. The technical assistance program, we'll talk a little bit more about our services under that are available for TA services, and those applications are accepted on a rolling basis. So with that overview, I'm going to let Karen talk more in depth about the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund.
Okay, so for the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund, applications are really evaluated based on each applicant's alignment with the 5 program priorities that we have listed here on this slide. If you look in the program guidelines, we have a lot more detail on the different types of documentation that could be provided to show an organization's alignment with these priorities. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about them here. However, if you have any questions about the specific priorities, feel free to submit a question and we can talk more about it at the end of the presentation. But one thing to think about when you're considering whether or not to apply for the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund program is that you don't necessarily need to meet each of these 5 program priorities in order to apply. However, the more you can demonstrate alignment with all of the priorities in your application, the stronger your application is going to score. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So in this round, up to $2 million is going to be available to support the acquisition of new nonprofit-owned space. And when you're thinking about your acquisition project, the program is looking to create new nonprofit-owned space. So if a building is being sold by a nonprofit owner to another nonprofit, that project would be ineligible to apply to the program because it is already in nonprofit use. In terms of grant awards that are available per applicant, applicants are eligible to apply for the lesser of $1 million or 25% of the acquisition cost. And once we kind of move through some of the general programmatic requirements, we're going to talk a little bit more about how the grants are sized, and we'll have an example for you to take a look at. On this slide, we have an overview of some of the real baseline programmatic eligibility requirements. There is a lot more detail in the program guidelines about the different eligibility requirements, but these are kind of the baseline considerations we want organizations to be thinking about. In order to apply at the time of application, so on February 22nd, when your application is submitted, you would need to have a fully executed letter of intent or a purchase and sale agreement to acquire a property. So the site needs to be identified, and you need to be in conversations with the owner about purchasing that property within a specific timeline. And so in your application, we ask organizations to demonstrate their ability to disperse to close on the acquisition by November 1st, 2019. And here, these grant funds really are intended to fund an immediate need and help organizations move quickly on acquisition projects. And that's why there is this shorter timeline from when the grant is awarded to when funds are dispersed, because we're really looking to fill an immediate need and help groups move quickly on acquisition projects. Another consideration for organizations who are thinking about applying is that the grants are secured by a deed of trust and use restriction that are recorded on the property. And the use restriction requires that the property that you acquire remain in nonprofit use for a 30-year compliance period. So this is a requirement that we encourage groups to talk to their boards about in advance of applying, and also other funders who may be investing in the property. It does limit what you could do with the property. So for instance, if 10 years from now you had a building and you wanted to lease out half of it to a Starbucks or something like that to bring in some additional cash flow, you would not be able to do that because of the use restrictions on the property. So we're happy to talk to organizations more about this during consultation calls or in the application window, but it is something to get on the radar of your board. And as part of the application, we do require organizations submit a board resolution authorizing the organization to submit the application, and also acknowledging that the board understands that if funds are awarded, there will be a deed of trust and use restriction recorded on the property. And finally, as part of the application process, we do require consultation calls be completed with me. The last day to schedule a call is January 25th. There's information on our website about how to schedule the calls, my email information. And the consultation calls need to be completed by February 1st. These calls are, relatively quick informational sessions, but it's really an opportunity for us to talk through your project with you and make sure there aren't any eligibility issues that we anticipate coming up, because we don't want organizations to go through the process of completing an application and then find out that they weren't eligible after submitting. Okay, so in terms of the review, all applications when submitted are reviewed by a selection committee. The committee's review focuses on the project's alignment with the 5 program priorities that we showed on the previous slide. And then the committee also looks at the extent to which the project's going to meet an urgent need. And when the committee's looking at urgency, they're looking at the need for the grant in terms of allowing the organization to move forward in a timely fashion with the acquisition, and then also the impact of this grant on both financial capacity and programmatic performance. So they're looking at how this acquisition is going to help your organization build its financial sustainability, but also increase the impact that you're making on the communities that you serve within San Francisco. And there's questions in the application that are really geared at addressing these components, we also do require organizations submit a 3-year operating projection. And in that operating projection, that's where your organization would have the ability to demonstrate how this acquisition is going to help contribute to financial sustainability. Oh, actually, I'm going to go back. Oh, there's one more. And then in addition to urgency, the committee is also looking at project readiness and organizational capacity. And so here, I think some things to think about as you're putting together your sources and uses for the project, which is one of the documents that's required as part of the application, is in addition to this grant, what are the other sources that are needed to complete the acquisition? So for instance, if you have a $4 million acquisition project and you are applying for a $1 million grant, what is the status of the other $3 million of funding commitments that are needed in order to close on the acquisition? And all of the funds, obviously, at the time of application don't need to be committed, but having an idea of what your plan is for filling that gap is just going to help build a stronger application. If you're looking at a building that requires some substantial renovation, other things that we ask as part of the application is, who are the members of your project team? What's their experience working on projects like this? Have they ever worked together in the past? Have they worked on nonprofit projects? These are all things that could show the capacity of your project team. If you have had conversations with a contractor and have a general idea of what the construction costs are going to be, that's just going to help strengthen your application and show that the organization understands the entire cost of the project, not just the acquisition, and is starting to think about the financing plan that is needed to move the project forward and ultimately place the building in service.
Great, thanks, Karen. So now we're going to look at a couple project examples that I think will help illustrate how this program really works. So the first one is that an organization wants to buy a building for $8 million, and there's going to be another $2 million worth of renovation and construction costs. So a total development cost of $10 million. Karen, how much is this organization eligible to apply for?
Okay, this organization is eligible to apply for $1 million. The grant is sized only on the acquisition costs, so construction is excluded, construction and soft costs, so any additional fees that you have to pay for like legal or getting an appraisal, those are all excluded from the calculation, and you're just looking at what you're paying to the owner to buy the building. And the grant is going to be the lesser of 25% of that price, or $1 million. And so in this instance, 25% of the $8 million acquisition price is $2 million. And so this organization's grant would be sized at the lesser of that, or $1 million, and is therefore eligible for a $1 million grant.
And so in this example, this organization needs to come up with a plan for the other $9 million, right? The other kind of $7 million for acquisition plus the $2 million for the construction costs or soft costs, that would make their application a little stronger.
Yes, definitely. And I think something to think about too is if part of that $9 million gap is being financed with a loan, in your operating projections, you would want to include the debt service payments on that loan and show that your organization has the capacity to make the principal and interest payments for a loan of that amount.
Okay, and what if this organization is going to launch a capital campaign? What would you be looking for there?
Yeah, and if an organization's launching a capital campaign, the campaign could be there's no requirement for at what stage your capital campaign needs to be at. However, when looking at project readiness, the more progress that you've made towards evaluating the feasibility of that campaign, the stronger your application is going to score. So if you've had conversations with a capital campaign consultant, or even have a capital campaign feasibility study, including that attachment with your application is definitely going to strengthen the application. If any of the funding sources have been committed, including that information in your sources and uses is going to strengthen the application. So for instance, if you've got a $3 million campaign and you've got $1 million committed, you know from your feasibility study that you have the capacity to raise the full $3 million, and you have a plan for reaching out to donors for that remaining $2 million, that's going to show that there's a level of readiness. And even though the funds aren't in hand now, your organization has a plan in place for getting the funds into your bank account and closing on the building by November 1st, 2019.
All right, great. Let's look at another example. So this organization is kind of just in discussions to acquire the building. They think the owner's interested in selling, but they're not sure whether they can actually get a letter of intent by the February 22nd application due date. Is this organization eligible to apply?
Unfortunately, no. This organization would not be eligible to apply without a fully executed letter of intent between the applicant and the owner of the building.
And what are you looking for in this letter of intent?
Good question. So in the letter of intent, we would be looking for, we would want the letter of intent to be entered into between the owner and the nonprofit, and we would want the letter to specify what the proposed terms of the acquisition are being discussed. So for instance, it could say Organization X is in discussions with the owner to acquire a building for $3 million. We would also want to have some information on what the steps were for moving from the letter of intent into a purchase and sale agreement. So we are in discussions to acquire this building for $3 million. X, Y, and Z needs to be delivered to the owner in order for the owner to work with the organization to negotiate a purchase and sale agreement.
Okay, great. So fully executed, signed by both parties. The price, I guess that's pretty important.
Address.
And the address, and maybe some terms of when they're going to seal the deal on the purchase agreement.
Yeah, I think really for project readiness, if you have a letter of intent, having a clear plan for what needs to happen to move this acquisition forward is really going to help to strengthen an organization's project readiness score.
Okay, and let's look at one final example. So this organization already purchased a building. They closed a couple months ago in September, and the acquisition was financed with a loan with some capital, some equity, and they also got a short-term bridge loan from a board member in order to meet the timeline to purchase this building. They're doing a little bit of construction on some tenant improvements, so it's not occupied yet by the organization. It's not placed in service yet. Is this organization eligible to apply?
So yes, this organization could be eligible to apply, but this is really why we require the consultation calls as a component of the application, because we would definitely want to talk through the status of this project with the organization to make sure that it met the eligibility requirements, and also to make sure that the grant amount that they requested was appropriate given the program requirements. But if the building had not been placed in service, and if there is still a gap in the budget, so here it would be a short-term bridge loan from the board member that needs to be repaid, the organization could be eligible to apply for an acquisition grant.
Okay, great, thank you. So let's talk a little bit more about RTA services, and then we will have some time to take your questions.
Okay, great. And I'll be talking about the technical assistance program as well. So the purpose of the technical assistance program is to provide support to organizations who are facing permanent displacement in the next 18 months or barriers to growth due to real estate constraints. And so when you're thinking about whether or not you fit within these categories, when we're talking about permanent displacement, that would really be a lease that's expiring in the next 18 months, or potentially a month-to-month lease, or an arrangement that maybe an organization has with a landlord where it hasn't really, maybe you've been in the building for many years, but you don't really have a formalized agreement about what the terms are for your organization moving forward for occupancy. That could also be classified as an organization at risk of displacement. In terms of barriers to growth, here what we're looking for is organizations who have the capacity to grow programmatically, but are limited in what they can do because of the real estate that they are currently occupying. So if you met either of those two criteria and were interested in receiving technical assistance services, organizations submit an application. The link to the application is available on our website. Applications generally take about 45 days to be approved, and once an application is approved, the organization is paired with a consultant from NCCLF, and then we really work with the organization to define a scope of work that's specific to what your real estate question is. We have an overview of some of the different services that can be provided through these contracts. So we can work with organizations to do some financial and space planning. So really thinking about what your programs are and how much space they need to operate, and then assigning some costs to that square footage. Once we've gone through that exercise, we can work with organizations to evaluate sites that meet their financial and programmatic criteria. If an organization finds a property that needs some tenant improvements made to it before they can occupy it, we can work with the organization to think about the budget for those tenant improvements, and think about what the plan is going to be for financing those costs, whether it's some organizational equity, maybe a loan, or some other grant sources that we may know about or can help point the organization towards. And then we also have a referral base of some architects, engineers, and contractors and attorneys that we oftentimes can point organizations in the direction of to help with either a lease negotiation, or if there's some tenant improvements that need to be done, there are people who they can interview to see if they'd be the right fit for your team. And everyone that we refer has experience working with nonprofits too, which can oftentimes be helpful. Okay, and so here on this slide, we just have a summary of some of the key application due dates to keep in mind. Since the technical assistance program applications are accepted on a rolling basis, these deadlines all really apply to organizations who are interested in applying for an acquisition grant from the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund. So the last day for consultation calls last day to schedule a consultation call is January 25th. And the last day to actually have a call is February 1st, 2019. Calls, today is the first day when consultation calls can start taking place. So between today and February 1st, your organization, if you're thinking about this program, shoot me an email and we can set up a time to talk about your project. And this call is required in order for your organization to submit the application. So if you went to submit an application on February 22nd and had never completed a consultation call, your application would not be accepted. The last day to ask just general questions about the program is February 8th. You can definitely ask questions after that date, but we can't guarantee after that point that we would be able to get back to you before the application is due. So we really encourage groups to get all their questions in by the 8th of February. The applications are due February 22nd at 12 o'clock p.m. and no late applications are accepted. The online system that we use shuts down at 12 o'clock p.m. And so if your application is submitted after that date, there's no way to submit it. In the past, there have been some groups who on the day the applications were due encountered some technical issues. And so we really encourage organizations to submit the application before that February 22nd deadline so you don't encounter an issue at the last minute and then for some reason are unfortunately unable to get your application in by that deadline. And after applications are submitted, we are tentatively expecting to announce awards in April of 2019.
All right, great. So this slide has our contact information, and Karen's contact information for consultation calls is also in the program guidelines. Mm-hmm. And you can find the program guidelines and the application here on our website. So we will start taking questions. I see a question that asks, how soon after the award notification can the grant funds be dispersed?
I would say, I would estimate probably 60 days after that April 2nd notification is when NCCLF would have the funds in hand and be able to disperse the grant funds. A thing to think about is that as the selection committee is completing their review, sometimes they have some requirements that they want the organization to submit prior to the disbursement of funds. This could be an update on the status of a capital campaign. It could be an updated sources and uses that includes more detailed estimates on a construction budget. It could be some due diligence reports like an appraisal, an environmental report. And so in addition to NCCLF being able to disperse the funds, when a grant can be dispersed may also depend on when an organization has the ability to submit those pre-disbursement requirements. But if everything were submitted on time, I would estimate probably 60 days would be the quickest we could turn around funds.
Okay. And there's a question about the deed of trust. So if there is a loan on the property, it will still need a deed of trust, right?
Yes. So if there's a loan on the property, there will also be a deed of trust and a use restriction associated with the investment fund grant. The deed of trust can be subordinated to any other financing that you have. And so we have worked with other lenders and financing partners who have gotten comfortable with the restrictions and the support, and we're comfortable subordinating our grant deed of trust to theirs. But both would be on title.
Okay. And I do want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be on our website. It'll get up in the next day. We'll have it there. So you will be able to access the PowerPoint in this recording. Another question that has come in about the nonprofit use during the 30-year period. Is a social purpose corporation okay if it's co-locating, I think, with a 501c3 type of nonprofit?
Yeah, it could be. And it definitely could be. Those are things that we look at on a case-by-case basis. And that would be considered by the selection committee when your application was reviewed. But it's definitely something that I think we should talk about during a consultation call, and it could definitely potentially be an eligible use depending on the organization and its alignment with the organization's mission.
Okay. Someone is asking, how many applicants have we had in the prior round for this program?
I would say on average, there's generally about 10 applicants, 8 to 10 applicants per round. That's what we've seen. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but in that range, depending on just timing and what projects are out there.
Mm-hmm. So this is a pretty competitive program.
Definitely, yeah. And of those who apply, on average, we're able to award grants to about 2 to 3 organizations per round. So it is very competitive, and how much we're able to how many groups we're able to award funds to is really going to depend on the projects, their budgets, and their requests.
Okay. I don't see, let's see, the maximum number. How many times can an organization apply if they are not successful in the past?
An organization, you can apply to the program 2 times for a particular site. And so, for instance, if an organization applied twice for Site A, was not awarded funding either time for that site, they would be ineligible to apply again for Site A. However, if they were to identify another site, they would have then 2 times to apply for Site B in 2 subsequent rounds.
All right, so we've got 2 chances basically
Per site.
Yeah. To apply. Let's see, are there any other questions? I don't see any other ones coming in, so with that, thank you for attending this webinar. I hope it was helpful as you think about your projects and your application to the NSIF program. Again, this webinar will be posted on our website. We do have another application workshop, which will be an in-person workshop on January 9th at 2 p.m. at the Bayview Library here in San Francisco. And Karen is available for questions, for consultation calls and any other questions. Please feel free to reach out to us via email or by phone. And with that, we will sign off. Thank you again for attending our webinar.